I'm the warmer-up act for this session, and when I was sitting nervously down there wondering what I would say, my mind goes back to getting a phone call about 6 months ago and saying, we're having this thing in Killarney, we come down and talk about Brexit. And of course, at that stage, the programme for Brexit was the negotiations were ongoing, Article 50 had been triggered, and the European Commission were going to meet in mid-October, and the whole thing was going to be signed up and delivered. So I said, yeah, that's a cakewalk. I'm down, we'll know exactly what's happening. That's not the case. So in one sense, I stand in front of you as a fraud. Because A, I don't know the answer to the question, deal or no deal. Coming down yesterday, I was beefing myself up, reading all the latest commentaries on what was happening. And those of you who are kind of political anoraks or have been following the Brexit negotiations will know that the mood music last weekend turned quite positive. Theresa May was going to have a cabinet meeting this week, and there's going to be a proposal on the table, and perhaps by the end of this week we have an exit, a withdrawal treaty ready for signing. So I was reading all the comments coming down yesterday. I was quite happy I was up to date with it. Backstops and double backstops and so forth. And then this morning I woke up to Tommy O'Gorman on RTE News talking about a leaked letter from Downing Street yesterday, the DUP response. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're still no clearer today as to what's likely to happen. So that's why I'm here as a fraud. For any political anoraks out there, the Institute of Government produced this flowchart or wiring diagram of what's likely to happen or what the process would be. And essentially says if there's a deal, it then has to go to the Parliament, both in Westminster and the EU Parliament, and we have an orderly exit, so everything is fine. If the Parliament rejects it, there are two options basically. Go to a no deal, or they request renegotiation, which the EU may or may not agree to. So again, you're either coming down to a no deal, or you go right back up to the start and renegotiate. And similarly, if negotiations fail, obviously it's a no deal. The Parliament accepts a no deal, so it's just a disorderly exit on the 29th of March next. Or Parliament could request renegotiation, and again it goes back up to the start. But really the log block at the moment is up here at this stage, and it's with the British Cabinet. So Theresa May is trying to get her Cabinet to agree to a proposal, as I understand it, that has fairly broad acceptance within the Commission and could fly, but that's proving a difficulty. So again, we don't know what's going to happen. Okay, if we look at the British market, it's about 38% for tourist arrivals, it's about 28% of our holiday visitors, and it's about 21% for tourism receipts. And on top of that, we get about 1.3 million visitors from Northern Ireland coming south every year, and they spend about £370 million. Last year was a particularly bad year. As you know, Britain voted to exit in June 2016. 2017, we saw quite a dip. We saw a dip in visitor arrivals, we saw a dip in revenue, and that was counter to what was actually happening, because the number of British people travelling abroad last year actually increased. So therefore we were losing share. And that's not unique. That's happened to Ireland several times, normally in economic cycles, where if the British market or the British economy is doing poorly, we fare less well than most other countries that draw tourists from Britain. Now there are a number of reasons for that. The British market to Ireland is fairly price sensitive. There's a number of short trips coming, so they may be second or third holidays, and they're sacrificed in a period of recession. So we're pretty exposed to that. This year, what's happening? Year to date, at the end of September, the number of arrivals is up about 1%. But if you look at the half-year figures, bed nights were down about 4%, and holiday bed nights were down about 6%. But if you look at what's happening in terms of British people travelling abroad, certainly up to the end of July, it's probably about the same as last year, maybe down 1%. So we're doing okay. We're kind of reflecting the general trend of outbound travel from Britain at the moment. So to put it the British market in perspective, I would say traditionally and historically it's been our largest market, our largest source market, and there are a number of factors obviously influencing why that's the situation. So it's number 2 by volume market. But we are very exposed because we are dependent upon it for 38% of our arrivals and 20-something% of our revenue. The only other country in Europe that's so heavily dependent on the British market is Cyprus. And so if you take a place like Spain, which is a huge destination for British outbound travel, and they're only exposed to it, about 22% of their total arrivals come from Britain. If you look at France, only about 10%. So it shows that these markets these destinations are more diversified than we happen to be in Ireland. In terms of numbers this year, we have more Europeans into the country the first 9 months of the year than British people. And that's the first time this year that the European arrivals in volume terms have exceeded the British market. In terms of revenue, that happened within the last 2 or 3 years. So it's number 3 in terms of receipts. But don't get me wrong, the British market is fairly important and very important to certain businesses and certain regions of the country. On the far chart there, you can briefly see that about 40-something% of the border region are dependent on sterling spending visitors, whereas in most other regions it's about 20%. So you've got very high exposure in the border areas, understandably, to the downturn or any change in sterling spending visitors. Also, the British market gives us the best seasonal spread. Paul was talking about seasonality and regionality. Gives us the best spread in terms of seasonality and also the best spread in terms of regionality. And it's obviously important for short breaks and so forth. The main thing that's affected us as a sector has been currency. We haven't seen any shifts in other aspects of our business in Britain. So we're exposed to the currency front. Before Britain voted, the pound would buy you about 136 euros. Obviously this was just immediately after the referendum, and since then it's kind of pushed around somewhere around 112, 113. Now it got a bit of fillip over the weekend, in the early days of this week, it was up to about 1.15 on the prospect of a resolution or an agreement. So the currency thing bears in terms of value for money and so forth, and also our loss of competitiveness. So if we're in a price-sensitive market and the visitor's pound in his pocket or her pocket doesn't go as far, we're very exposed. The other side of that coin is that for most other people, be it from mainland Europe, Euro-spending people, or people with a dollar, they're getting far more bang for their buck in Britain now than they are in Ireland. And that's going to continue as long as sterling stays fairly weak. We're getting into one of the impacts of this, obviously, is the value for money. So if you take the very good value for money rating of the Fáilt Ireland survey, you can see it has dropped from 19% in 2015 said our holiday was very good value, 12% in 2016, and only 6% in 2017. Now the interesting thing is that the very good value for money has fallen in all markets, but has fallen more sharply in the British market. So we're into kind of Paddy Power territory in terms of looking what's going to happen to the currency as we go forward. The general consensus appears to be that if there is a no-deal Brexit, that sterling will take a hit. And some people are saying it could go down as near almost to parity. And that's probably a bit extreme, but it will fall. That seems to be the general consensus. I'm not advising you to go out and put money on this because I take no responsibility for forecasting currency. If there's a uptick, it will come with an agreement. But it probably won't be terribly significant. That's what the kind of currency traders are telling us and what they're banking on. So we probably have to live with that level of currency in a positive situation if there's an agreement, a withdrawal agreement. But if it's a no deal and they crash out 29th next March, that 113 figure is going to disimprove. So therefore we're going to have that challenge next year. I suppose it's true to say that when you look at the tourism sector and Brexit, in fairness, we're not as exposed as other sectors of the economy. If we were sitting here in the food industry or the agri sector or some other export sectors, we're probably going to be far more worried about it than the tourism sector. But as I said, it is important to some sectors, and it's a component of probably everybody's business that's in the hospitality business. So the areas of concern, or the areas of issue, obviously currency volatility, we talked about that. The other is the common travel area, which basically means we can travel freely, and British people can travel freely to Ireland between the two countries. We bang on about this quite a lot. It is important. It predates the European Union agreements, and we expect that to continue. There's no reason why it shouldn't continue. That being said, those of you who come through Dublin Airport will know it doesn't mean anything, because if you come in from Britain on a flight to Dublin, you queue up with everybody else and got to go through passport control. Whereas if we go in the other direction, we're treated as domestic arrivals, and we don't have to show a passport. Another side issue of the common travel area is that at the moment, and this is important in terms of emerging markets, we've got an agreement, the Irish government have got an agreement with the British government for certain visa entries into Ireland. So in from certain countries, if you have a visa to enter the UK, you're then entitled to visit into Ireland. And we have got a joint system on visas for Chinese and for Indian people travelling to both countries. One of those is reciprocal, the other isn't. So that's important as we go forward. And they are pilot schemes. And I think they expire in 2021. So you could conceive to have a situation that if Brexit happens with a no deal, that we would suffer, that we wouldn't have those visa arrangements in place, or the British wouldn't agree to reinstating those visa arrangements. The land border, physical barriers in the border, no matter what size or what shape, will be a disincentive to cross-border travel. And those of us who are old enough to remember when there were checkpoints at the border, or the bridge in Ballyshannon and so forth, simply the perception of them being there caused people to turn back. So they found it a bit intimidating, so any kind of physical structure is going to be. And if you look at the chart up here, you can read it. We have about 450,000 people that go north from the Republic, but about 1.4 million people in Northern Ireland come south into the Republic for stays. We get about 300,000 visitors from other parts of the world that enter the island of Ireland through a Northern Ireland port or airport. And if you look at the Northern Ireland situation, about 550,000 visitors to Northern Ireland actually come through the Republic. So if you exclude, and John will have better figures on this or contradict me, the majority of visitors from places other than Britain into Northern Ireland come through the Republic. So the downside for Northern Ireland is actually quite significant there. Eoghan will talk about the air service agreement, but essentially means the liberalisation of air service. Any European airline can fly between and within any European country. If they crash out with no deal, technically, there will be no flights, and it will revert back to the old bilateral systems. Just to put in perspective, about 160 flights daily in each direction between Britain and Ireland. They provide about 23,000 seats, and they serve 24 airports in Britain. The dependency of the various airports is always significant. 85% of NOC's traffic is cross-channel air services. Kerry, for instance, 57, Cork 57, Shannon 46. So, sorry. The other two aspects then are the regulatory alignment and the cost on trading costs. And there's some connection between both of those. If you take regulatory alignment, for instance, take coach drivers. We both operate EU directives on coach drivers' hours at the moment. If Britain crashes out, if the UK crashes out, you will have a situation where coach operators in Northern Ireland could have a different regulatory regime and could have a competitive advantage in terms of operating coach tours, for instance. Another area is state aid. As you know, state aid directives exist. They impinge on our business in several areas, not least in terms of supporting airlines or air route developments. Again, if the UK were to crash out, you could have a situation where airports or airlines could be supported by the government of the UK to fly into Belfast, for instance, to the disadvantage of air services in the south.
Noel, 5 minutes.
Okay, try and do it. Impacts on trading costs. There have been several reports, including the SRI, which says that the consumer basket will go up at least 3 to 4%, even with an ordinary withdrawal, and obviously that has some impacts on our business. Getting ready for Brexit, Fáilte Ireland have quite a number of programs, business development programs, that are aimed at three things. One is to support you in terms of retaining your British market or your Northern Ireland market. The second is to help you diversify, and the third is to provide better value for money. It's a whole raft of programs there. They've reached about 1,500 businesses, and about almost 5,000 individuals. And they're talking about maybe more product offering initiatives next year, and certainly beefing up the focus on marketing in Northern Ireland. And hopefully the 38 or 39 million extra budget allocated to the tourism agencies will find its way to some of those. A point, Tim was raising the point earlier about the economic agency or the economic impact of tourism. If you were a hotelier in Monaghan and your neighbour down the road was a mushroom farmer, since Brexit came about, or since the referendum, the government have allocated more resources to Enterprise Ireland, to Board BIA, to IDA, and there are actually grants available or supports available in terms of euro supports to be prepared to do research, to diversify your market, and those are not available to the tourism industry. I don't know whether it's because, maybe it's because Fáilte Ireland is not seen as an economic development agency in the same sense as Enterprise Ireland is, or on Board BIA. The other one is the Brexit loan scheme, which was introduced last year. It's 200 million, 4%, open to SMEs. That's not promoted into the tourism sector. So if they crash out, what's going to happen? Doomsday situation is that flights will be grounded, similar to the ash clouds some years ago. And ITIC have come up with a number of about 260 million as the cost to the tourism sector if it's a crash out, no deal. I believe that the Fáilte Ireland figure, which they've submitted to the department, is higher than that. And it could go up to $500 million over time, depending on how it's handled, if you like. So, as I said, I don't have the answer whether there's going to be a deal or no deal, but I'm sure there are plenty of questions, and we've got two experts here that will be happy to chime in and answer your questions, which I can't do. Thank you.